So just as a quick introduction, we're doing an interview with Sal Zammitti for Northwest Dive History Association, which is collecting oral histories and the stories of diving, because we have lots of good stuff and the stuff is not going away, but we want to make sure that we're preserving the stories. And so Sal's been in the industry for a long time. So he is currently the owner of Bamboo Reef Divers, both of the store in San Francisco and a store also in Monterey. But he's been in the industry. Sal, when did you start diving?
I started diving in 1954 when I was a senior in high school. I made a spear and I got a mask and a pair of fins, and I used to go spearfishing off of the coast of Massachusetts.
So that should have been pretty cold
Yeah, just a bathing suit. It was cold.
Yeah, it was way cold. So how did you get involved in scuba?
Well, when I was going to college in Boston, in the summers I worked at a sporting goods store in Boston, and they had some diving gear. Actually, I worked for Jordan Marsh first, which was a big department store in Boston that had a very exotic sporting goods department. They brought in fishing tackle and guns from all over the world, and they brought diving gear in. And I said, well, I got to try this. And so I got a regulator and a tank and just started diving.
So that was what, late 50s?
Late 50s, yeah.
So, and that was in Boston. So what was the draw? What the exciting part about learning to dive for you? Was it the spearfishing or?
No, just the fact of going underwater and seeing what was there. I really loved it.
Well, very cool. So who were your mentors? Did you have any instruction? Did you have somebody that guided you along?
Well, not when I first started. I didn't. I just took the stuff and used it. But then I got involved with New England Divers, and Jim Cahill was, I would say, a mentor of mine. You know, he was an ex-UDT frogman from the Korean War, and I went to work for New England Divers. But before I went to work for them, I got a chance to do a job in Boston. There was a gentleman that had a commercial diving company, and kind of rinky-dink, but back in the late 50s, they had a couple of big plane crashes at Logan Airport, and he was looking for divers, and he asked me if I wanted to work recovering stuff from the airplane and bodies and everything like that, and so I started doing that. And that was when I got into diving in low light levels and all the bad stuff, and from there I went to work for New England Divers.
So you become an instructor, my notes say, with NAUI in 1961, and is that about the right date?
Yeah, 1962 I think. I got a 3-digit card.
So less than 400, I'll bet.
372.
So you've been a NAUI instructor since almost the beginning of NAUI, so that's pretty exciting. So New England Divers, it was a big dive store that started in New England, but then where did that take you after New England and Massachusetts?
Well, when we had grown as much as we could in Massachusetts, I was talking to the owners at the time, said, the way we can grow is to open retail stores around the country. So we started opening retail stores. We bought a couple of them. We bought Jordan Klein's Underwater Sports in Miami, and I went down there and set the whole thing up for New England Divers and spent 2 years there. Then we bought Harveys dive shop up in Seattle, and I spent 2 years working there.
Is that Harveys wetsuits?
Yeah, Harveys wetsuits. In fact, we built a new building. So Harvey took one level and we took the main level, put an indoor pool in, and he had his suit manufacturing on the lower level, and we were at the store in Renton, Washington.
Very cool.
Yeah, right outside of Seattle. Then while I was up there, I went down to San Diego and opened a store, and then I went to LA and opened a store. And then from there, I decided I need to do it on my own if I'm gonna become really successful on my own.
So that's how you got involved in Bamboo Reef in San Francisco.
Yeah, well, what happened was Al Giddings, who started Bamboo Reef, had the store here in San Francisco, and I knew him, and he called me up and he said this would be a good store for New England divers to buy. And so I said, well, I'll come up and fly up and talk to you. So I flew up, and I had never been to San Francisco. I thought I died and went to heaven, but I got here when I came here. And I looked at the store, and it was in real deep financial trouble, and told New England Divers we should buy the store because it had tremendous potential. They said no, they were having some internal problems. So I went to Al and said, they won't do it, but I said, I'll do it, but I don't have any money. But I said, I can make it work and you'll get your money. And so he went along with me, and January, about the 15th of January in 1972, I took over the store. And by September, we had opened another store in Berkeley and bought a piece of property, put a pool in, opened a store in Berkeley. And from there on,
it's been good.
It's been exciting.
So, you had any relations with doing work with the Navy or the military at all?
Yeah, while I worked for New England Divers, we had a commercial diving division, and so we did stuff back at in that age in the '60s. The Navy divers, the hard hats, and those guys, that was all volunteer work, and they didn't get paid extra, so they hated to do the stuff. So we would get calls on stuff that was open circuit or surface supplied, not hard hat stuff, heavy duty. We did a lot of work with nuclear submarines at the time during the Cold War when it was pretty wild, and we did a lot of work with a couple of companies that were building sonobuoys, which they dropped from planes to detect enemy subs. We did a lot of work with them. We did a lot of work with different groups in the Navy for various and sundry things. A lot of it at the time was very secret. And we'd get a call, okay, you got to go on this job, and we'd leave, and I'd tell my wife, they said it's only going to be 2 days, and 2 weeks later I wouldn't be back, and I said, as long as you don't get a call from the Navy, I'm still alive.
You're doing good.
Yeah.
Good. So, how about with dam inspections and the Corps of Engineers and those folks?
Yeah, we did a lot of work with all through New England on various dams, and there are a lot of small dams on the rivers there that needed work on them, and on the Connecticut, I dove maybe on the Connecticut River, we probably did 4 or 5 different dams, and we used to do power stations, the water intake for power stations. We did all of that. The first time I went on a job with Jim, he was still diving and active, and it was on a dam on the Connecticut River up in New Hampshire on the Vermont border, and we had wetsuits on and all our gear and double tanks, because we were going down a penstock that was probably 120 or 30 feet deep. And I said, oh, how are we going to get down? We're going to climb down the ladder? He said, no. And we were probably 20 feet off the water. And he just jumped off. Jim jumped. I said, well, if he can do it, I can do it. And I jumped off, and on the way down I went, whoa, what am I doing here? But it was an e-ticket ride then.
Yeah, good.
Yeah.
Good. So, what as the owner of Bamboo Reef, and you've taught for a lot of years, but you've also taken people on pretty nice trips all over the world. So, what's your favorite thing to do as a dive store owner or as an instructor?
Probably the favorite thing is when we do these trips is to see the I don't know if you'd call it joy or enthusiasm of the people you take on the trips, and see how they enjoy it. Plus, I'm enjoying it, but to see how much they like it and how great a time they're having. I like that. I like that.
So it's partially sharing the joy of being underwater and seeing new things. So where's your favorite dive locations?
I get asked that a lot, and the way I answer it is it depends on what you want. If I want, for Cocos Island, I think is spectacular for sharks and big fish. It's wonderful. For almost everything else, Raja Ampat is as good as anything I've ever seen.
That's in Indonesia.
Yeah, yeah. But Catalina on the Channel Islands is phenomenal in the summer. We run a trip down there in the summer, and you know, the water temperature's in the high 60s. The visibility will be, depending on what site you're at, 50 to 100 feet. And that's as good as any tropical diving in the world. And when people get there, you know, sometimes we have to beat them over the head to go. But when they get there and they realize how good it is, and you take a dive like Farnsworth Banks off of Catalina, is spectacular.
Way cool. So that's the most fun, is probably going out and sharing dive experiences and taking people on trips. Is there anything else that you really enjoy doing in the dive business?
Yeah, I like selling dive gear.
Yeah. Well, that's good. You've been at it for a long time.
Yeah, I enjoy the interaction with people. I like turning people onto diving. I like selling the gear.
Okay, so what's the least fun?
Taking care of business.
The hard dollars.
Yeah, and I've been extremely fortunate in the last 22 years. And my oldest daughter, came to me about 22 or 23 years ago and said, "Dad, I don't like what I'm doing." And she was in the legal profession, and she said, "I want to go to work for you." And I went, "I can't afford you." She said, "I don't care about the money. I just want to be happy working." And so she has, and she runs the business now. She's taken over, and she's done a great job, and everybody in the industry knows her, and they like her. And so she's been a real asset to me.
Very good. So what's been the most significant change in diving, in your opinion, since you started? Is it equipment? Is it training? Is it a little bit of everything?
I think it's a little bit of everything. I think, you know, I think the training, and in this country, because of the liability we have, the training has to go to some extremes on certain things. The equipment has changed, mostly for the better. Anybody that's dove for a long time will, I think, go along with that. But because of the liability problems we have, the training has become kind of tedious at times.
So if you were able to change something in diving, what would you change in anywhere in a business? And how we do business with our public, or how we do business with the training agencies, or what do you see as we could improve our business?
That's a good question. I'm really not sure. I think, and again, I don't teach myself very much anymore, except when I'm on trips and leading people. And I think if we could make it easier sometime for the people, but unfortunately we can't make it as easy as people now want it. And in this day and age, everybody wants, you know, wham, bam, thank you, ma'am, you know, one day and I'm a diver, and that's not going to happen, and it shouldn't happen. And unfortunately, that's the way everybody thinks about everything nowadays. But if we could somehow change that a little bit, that would be good. Equipment-wise, the person that's going to become a billionaire is the person that can make a 3 mil suit that'll keep you warm in 45-degree water.
It's true.
No matter what it's made of.
Right.
And you know, going back to the old days when we worked for the Navy and everything, we at one point, when in the Cold War, when the United States government thought they were going to have to go to war against Russia, and it would be up in the Arctic Circle area, and they were in the same thing, how to keep somebody warm underwater, and they had a company make some nuclear-powered vests.
Oh my gosh, really?
And we tested them, which is maybe why I'm crazy now. These were nuclear-powered vests that they had a little power plant that was hanging on your side, and I never found out exactly what was in them, but they were nuclear-powered, and it was pretty hairy, and they decided that wasn't the way to go.
Wow.
But some of the other stuff we did for them was wild.
So, in your history of diving, you've been around a lot of relatively famous folks. You've helped You bought the Bamboo Reef from Al Giddings, who of course is famous for a lot of the movies that he's done. Did you help him with any of those? Did you?
A couple of the ones, on a couple of different occasions I did, but the big ones, no, because I could never, he'd want me to go, but I didn't have the time to take away from the business because they'd be gone for a month at a time.
Right.
I had a couple of my instructors that worked on some of the movies, on The Deep and on one of the James Bond movies. What was the one that was done in the Mediterranean, For Your Eyes Only?
Yeah.
Yeah. One of my good friends was one of the stuntmen on that, and I don't know if you remember the scene where the shark comes up and attacks, and he bites him right in the crotch. It was my buddy Doug that he did that too. Fortunately, it didn't really bite down, but
Yeah. That's good. So, out of all your experiences, one of the things that Northwest Dive History Association does is we do a sea story contest that we do as an annual basis, and you know the rules of sea stories. They've got to start appropriately. They have to have some semblance of truth. They have to be first person, and the most important thing is you can't let truth get in the way of a good sea story. So there's an open invitation. What's your favorite sea story?
Well, let me preface that by saying we never, when we were doing some of the diving work we were doing, we never talked about it until we'd be at a party, and all the people in the company or something would be at a party, and we'd start drinking, and then we'd start talking about it, and our wives are going, "What? You did what?" And so, we did a lot of stuff like that that was pretty wild. I had an instance of, we were looking for a wreck for an insurance company, and we were out off of Massachusetts, off the coast, and we were dragging a grappling hook in about 190 feet of water. And we hooked up on something, and this was a big yacht that the insurance company was afraid the guy had torched and sunk on purpose because he claimed he had like 8 or 10 Italian silk suits on there among all the other stuff. And so when we hooked up on this, whatever it was, and I put the doubles on and swam down, and good visibility, it was great visibility, and on the bottom it had hooked up on a cable, and it was probably a transatlantic cable because it was about 4 inches in diameter, and I couldn't get the hook out from under the cable, and the line was tight. So every time a swell would come by and the line would raise, it would pull the cable off the ground. So what I thought I'd be really smart, and I'd put my legs under the cable and my knees, and it'd hold it up, and I did. And the cable came back down and just drove my legs right into the muddy bottom. And all of a sudden I was stuck there. And I did finally get out and got the grappling hook out and got out. I waited till it bounced again and pulled everything out. And I was on the way to the surface when the other diver was on his way down to get my body, if that's what he thought. And because I had been at that depth for probably 10 minutes. And so I had to, and we were diving on air. So I had to deco for a little bit. And then I was one of the first divers on the Andrea Doria. And, nobody dove it after Peter Gimbel and Bernie Campoli dove it when it first sank, and then for 5 years nobody went on it, and we got a contract to go out and survey it to maybe salvage.
Was that on open scuba?
We did it on open scuba, open circuit scuba. This was long before the days of mixed gases for sport diving. Yeah. It was 1962, I think, and we went right to the bottom, 265, and then up the side of the wreck. And that was kind of wild.
That'd be really wild.
Yeah.
So you lived in Federal Way. You ran the New England Diver Store in the Seattle area for
Yep.
a while. What were your most favorite things about living in Seattle?
I like the climate. I like the outdoors. I love the fact that you could go diving on one day, and the next day you could go skiing up in the mountains, and which is why I really like San Francisco also, because they're very similar. And I tell people if I had to move out of San Francisco, the second place I'd move to would be the Seattle area. I think it's a beautiful area, and It's really good.
So you talk about good diving in Catalina. How about in the San Francisco area? I know that you've spent a lot of time in Monterey and Monterey Bay. Is there a favorite location in Northern California?
No, the Monterey area is good. I like off of Carmel. When the weather's right and the diving is good, it's great. Even in Monterey Bay, when in the winter, if there's no storms, the visibility can get out to 40 feet, which is pretty nice diving. A lot of sea life. People think that it's people that don't know think it's dead and it's dark and everything, and that's not always the case.
How about in the Seattle Puget Sound area? Is there any favorite dive locations up there?
Not really. No. I didn't do as much diving up there as I would have liked to, but I did a trip on the Nautilus a few years ago up through all the way up the inland passes to Sitka, Alaska, and that was really great diving up through there, and because everything is like what we have down here in the Bay Area, except twice as big.
Twice as big,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really great.
Yeah. So does the name Gary Rubba mean anything to you?
A blast from the past.
Yeah.
I knew Gary. Gary used to be our U.S. divers rep up in Seattle. And he'd come up driving up in his big Cadillac convertible. How do you know Gary?
A long time.
Yeah.
And actually, Tom Hemphill thought that you might have had a relationship with Gary Rubba.
Yeah, he was our Aqualung rep, U.S. divers at the time. He was our U.S. divers rep up there. And I got to know Gary real well. We'd go out drinking, go out to dinner, stuff like that, go out to lunch.
So, and he has had some good stories too, I think.
Oh, I bet he did, yeah.
So, cool.
Let me ask a question.
You bet.
You've had this great dive history. What do you see for the future of recreational scuba diving and dive shops and training and that whole picture? Just how far off in the future? Where do you think that's going?
Well, I think part of the problem in the diving business, this is my opinion, part of the problem I think the dive business has had is that a lot of times we have, what do I want to call them? Amateurs, sportsmen. Guy's an instructor, he's working for a shop, and he thinks he can do a better job and has no business background and goes out and opens a store and wonders why in a year or 2 years he doesn't have any money left. You know, the axiom is if you want to be a millionaire in the dive business, start off with 2 million.
Right.
And so I think that's a big problem, and it always has been, and I don't know what they can do to change it. I think people are getting more educated now, and I think people are realizing that they need some business background because the diving business is not a game. The diving is a game, the diving is a sport, but the diving business is a business, just like any other business. And it's got to be run like a business, or else it's not going to be successful. I mean, I can name 2 stores in this area that went out of business in the last 10 or 12 years, and 3 of them actually, and I know 2 of them each lost probably close to $1 million before they went out of business. And I look at it and go, wow, I wish they'd have given me that money.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And dive training, that's certainly changed since the early days.
Oh yeah, it has. Did I tell you? Oh yeah, I said. We used to just send the people off
Right.
and go do the dive and come back, and if you're okay, we'll give you the card.
Yeah.
And I think everybody did it that way. And in this day and age, you can't do it that way. I think primarily because of the liability.
Sued, right?
Yeah. I think sometimes some of the agencies, for areas like here, the cold water areas like the Northwest, like the Northeast, like here, I think some of the people, they overemphasize that it's going to be cold and dark and dirty and everything, when it isn't always that way. And most of the time it isn't that way. And we have, all the time we have students that they take the lessons, they go, oh, I'm not going to go to Monterey though because my friend told me it was terrible and it's cold and dirty. And so we bang on them enough to get them to go to Monterey to do their checkout dives, and they come back and say, wow, it was wonderful. It wasn't dirty or dark, it was great. I saw all these fish, I saw sea lions. and those are the people we like to get out there telling everybody else about it.
Yep, yep. A good fitting wetsuit, modern wetsuit will keep you warm.
Absolutely,
You know?
absolutely. And if you dive a lot, you wear a dry suit.
That's right.
Yeah. So.
I could sit here all day, but this is great.
So that was the end of my questions.
You want to talk about old equipment?
Sure.
Huh?
Yeah, let's go.
How about, you know what a Pesh sports suit is?
Pecs.
Pesh Sport, P-E-S-C-H-E, Pesh Sport.
No.
It was made in France. It was made out of a material that was not neoprene. It was before the era of neoprene. That was the first suit I had. And they made them, and I got them when they brought them into the United States. And it was about a ½ inch thick, and it was a foam of some type. But if you looked at it wrong, it would fall apart. It was very, very fragile. So, and that was the first suit I had, and it sort of worked because it had seals like a dry suit has now on the wrists, but the rest of it fit loose. And then after that, they had scuba totes, and the totes were the totes makes umbrellas, and they make rubber boots, T-O-T-E-S. They still are in business, but they made a dry suit that was thin latex, and you slipped it on in front entry and tied it up, and it was kind of like an Aquala, but not near as heavy. The same thing. If you touched something wrong, it would just rip.
So is that like the Bell Aquadyne dry suits?
Well, Bell Aqua, the Bell Aquas are the heavier ones, yeah, that front entry or back entry, depending on what they were. But the scuba totes were the first ones.
So did you ever dive in those suits before you moved into neoprene and wetsuit?
Oh yeah, that was my first suit. Was a Pesh Sport, and then I went to a scuba tote suit, and then of course when the neoprene was available. Because we couldn't afford to buy a finished made suit, we used to make the suits, and we'd get 3 or 4 or 5 of us, and we'd get at somebody's house in the evening and with a case of beer and make a pattern and start gluing the suit together. And you wanted just your suit, you didn't want it to be the last one that was made, because by then you probably had 4 or 5 beers, you know. And we used to make our own suits, yeah.
So the store that New England divers bought out of Seattle was a Harveys store, and that's Harveys wetsuit.
Right.
So you were down or upstairs selling dive equipment. Harveys was downstairs making wetsuits.
Right.
And they're still in active business today.
They're in that same building.
Are they in the
As
same
far as I
building?
know, yeah.
Very good.
Yeah.
So yeah, Harvey's kind of revolutionized the wetsuit manufacturing, at least in the Northwest, because
Oh,
you could buy a ready-made suit from Harvey's and not have to build your own.
that's right. Yeah, he did, and he did revolutionize it. And they had good patterns. They had good cuts. They were pretty successful.
Oh. How about regulators? What you started probably with 2-hose regulators, and then moved slowly into single hose regulators. When did that occur? In the late 50s, early 60s, or?
Probably late 60s into the single hose regulators that were, they had the Aquamatic from Aqualung first, and then from our US Divers it was at the time, and then Rose Aviation made the Rose Pro, which didn't last very long, and then and Sportsways come out, and they made a single hose regulator that was pretty good. But at the start, everybody used 2-hose regulators. You used either a single stage Mistral or a 2-stage Aquamaster, or you used a Dacor Dial-A-Breath. We used to call them Dial-A-Death. I had to make sure I didn't say Dial-A-Death.
So, computer technology has probably been the thing that's changed the most since I've been in diving. But so when you started diving, everything was done off dive tables. I assume Navy tables with watch and depth gauge, and then it's been transforming into the computer world. But I assume that you use the SOS dive meters at some point in your career?
Yeah, I used them a lot in early days, and people used to call it the Bend-O-Matic, and I used to say, I used to say to people, oh, that thing is terrible, you know, I'd have one on my wrist. I said, how do you know? Have you used one? Well, no, but my friend told me. I said, did your friend have one? Well, no, but he heard from an instructor. And it would be like that all the time, and it was totally untrue. And when the modern computers come out, I said, I'm going to see how this works. And I took a Bendomatic, an SOS meter, and I took a couple of modern dive computers and took them all together on a dive, and they all read pretty much the same. And that, because the SOS, I don't know if you know how the SOS meter works.
No.
It has two bags, gas bags, with a permeous membrane. And when they designed it, they made the permeous membrane so it would equate approximately to the way your tissues absorb gas. And of course, they had to average it out. But I mean, I took SOS meters on some really deep dives on air, and they worked fine.
So diving the Andrea Doria in the early 60s, the Andrea Doria is at 200 plus feet, right?
265 to the bottom.
And you're diving air
Yeah,
at 265
yeah,
on double tanks.
yeah.
On double
Actually, I had a set of twin Navy aluminum. They were each about 100 cubic feet apiece. They were spun bottles.
Right.
I had traded a guy on a submarine for some something, a piece of equipment I had, and he gave me the set of doubles. I had to smuggle them off the sub.
So spun 105
Yeah.
on air.
Yeah.
At today, that would be considered somewhat insane and reckless. So
I guess.
But when you learned to dive, that wasn't an uncommon. It was
No,
probably deeper than normal, but not necessarily uncommon.
No, a lot of people back then did a lot of dives in the 100 to 150 foot range, and because they weren't told that they could die at that depth, and they did it. We did a lot of work very deep on air because gases weren't available then. And at New England Divers, we took the jobs because everybody else said, no, call them, they'll do it. And they're crazy enough, they'll do the jobs. And so we took those jobs, and you know, we went actually very deep on air. And
survived.
and survived.
You're still here today?
Yeah, I'm still
Still
here.
here today.
Yeah,
And you're still diving.
I'm still diving. Yeah, just in February, I was in the Philippines for a week, and I leave in July for Komodo, and people say, well, you still dive? You know, when they come in the store and they say to you, well, do you still dive? And I know what they mean. And I go, I've slowed down. I'm down to about 100 dives a year now, which is about what I do. But I used to do a lot more.